11 years of silence ends exactly at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. The neighborhood of Oak Creek has spent over a decade burying its own history, but tonight, the past walked through the front doors of the local precinct. A young woman, shivering and soaked from the late autumn drizzle, stood at the intake desk. She didn't offer a name at first. She simply placed a tarnished silver locket on the counter, a piece of jewelry that had been buried in a shallow grave in 2010 along with a girl named Shelby Tebow. The desk sergeant didn't recognize her, but the database did. The facial recognition pinged back with a terrifying impossible match. She is Shelby. She is the girl who vanished during a summer barbecue. The girl whose disappearance destroyed 4 families and built the career of Detective Elias Thorne. But as she looks up, her eyes betray a cold, calculated awareness that no child should possess. She hasn't come back to reclaim her life. She has come back to ensure that the secrets hidden beneath the concrete in the Tebow basement finally rise to the surface. Welcome to Swasti Diaries, where we dissect the crimes that refuse to stay buried. Tonight, we begin the long, dark descent into a mystery where every truth is a carefully placed lie, and every witness is playing a part in a much larger, more dangerous game. We have to ask, if she is really Shelby, then who has been holding her for 11 years, and why would they let her go now, just as the statute of limitations on the financial embezzlement scandal begins to expire? Welcome to Swasti Diaries. The girl standing at the intake desk is a mirror, reflecting a past we all thought was shattered. When Shelby Tebow disappeared in 2010, the investigation stalled on a single convenient narrative: a kidnapping gone wrong, a suspect who vanished, and a community eager to move on. Detective Elias Thorne, the man who led that initial search, built his reputation on closing the case without ever finding the body. But the locket on the desk, tarnished, damp, and smelling faintly of the earth where it was buried, tells a different story. It is not just a piece of jewelry. It is a signal. The neighbors in Oak Creek, families who once kept their front porch lights burning to welcome a lost child home, are now locking their doors from the inside. They know that if she is here, the secrets they buried under the concrete of the Tebow basement are no longer safe. The girl's return is not a miracle. It is an indictment. As the precinct lights hum in the late-night quiet, the stakes shift from a missing person case to a systematic unraveling of a multifamily lie. We are looking at a calculated move by someone who has been waiting for the statute of limitations to expire on a massive embezzlement scheme. The question remains: is she a victim, a pawn, or the architect of her own return? Thorne is already sweating, his hands steadying a stack of files that contain the very evidence he suppressed a decade ago. And the game has only just begun. The Tebow house remains a mausoleum of suburban normalcy, preserved in the amber of a Tuesday night in 2010. Stepping into the foyer, the first thing that strikes you is the absence of violence. There is no shattered glass, no splintered doorframe, no signs of a desperate struggle that would accompany the abduction of a child. The front door was locked from the inside. The windows were secured with factory-installed pins. It was a hermetically sealed box, yet Shelby Tebow vanished into the ether. Walking toward the kitchen, the floorboards don't groan under the weight of the past. They hold the silence of a house that was cleaned too thoroughly. A half-finished glass of milk sits on the granite island, the ring of dried calcium clinging to the crystal like a fossilized watermark. It is a detail Thorne recorded in his initial report but chose to omit from the official summary, claiming it was just a coincidence of a busy household. But here is the contradiction that pulls at the thread of the entire case. If the house was locked and the family was out, who washed the glass? The sink is bone dry, scrubbed of any biological residue, but the interior of the glass still holds a faint metallic tang, a chemical trace that doesn't belong in a pantry. It suggests that the kitchen was not a scene of a kidnapping, but a staging ground for a calculated, quiet removal. Someone didn't break in, they belonged here. They had the time to pour a drink, make a mess, and then meticulously sanitize the evidence of their own existence, leaving behind only the ghost of a routine that never actually occurred. The metallic tang on the glass wasn't just a cleaning agent, It was a solvent, the kind used to strip industrial-grade paint. It was the first structural crack in the Thibault facade. If someone had the clearance to scrub this house into oblivion, they were not looking for a child. They were hiding a transaction. I turned my attention to the original case files, specifically the witness statements regarding the charcoal gray sedan parked near the driveway. Thorne had dismissed it as a delivery vehicle, a phantom of late-night commerce. But there were no deliveries scheduled in this neighborhood at 2 in the morning. I pulled the original logs, the ones filed deep in the basement archives, and found the contradiction. Arthur Vance, the local teacher who lived 3 streets over, had claimed to be grading papers at home that night. Yet, his own vehicle registration was flagged for a mechanical repair at a local shop exactly 48 hours after the disappearance. The shop record noted a replacement of a specific, rare charcoal gray bumper trim that matched a fragment of paint I found lodged in the Thibault mailbox post. Thorne never cross-referenced the shop logs. He never even visited the house. He simply signed the report and closed the file. The sedan wasn't a phantom. It was a getaway vehicle, and the driver wasn't a random opportunist. They were someone with a key to the house, someone who knew precisely which floorboards to avoid to keep the silence intact. But if Vance was the driver, why would he leave a trail that led directly to his own front door? The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. The hunt for the girl was rapidly becoming a hunt for a shadow. If Arthur Vance was the driver, why would he leave a trail that led directly to his own front door? The answer arrived not through a confession, but through the microscopic silence of a lab report. The DNA found on the hem of the girl's dress, the one she wore when she arrived at the precinct, did not match the Thibault family, nor did it match any known missing person. It matched a soil sample from a remote, restricted access drainage basin near the city's northern perimeter, a location Arthur Vance claimed he had never visited in his life. The contradiction is absolute. If the girl was kidnapped 11 years ago, she could not have been standing in that basin 3 days ago. The only logical conclusion is that she was never missing in the way we were told. She was a delivery. Someone dropped her at the edge of the woods, knowing she would be found, knowing she would trigger a reopening of the 2010 case. But why frame Vance with a car repair and a soil sample? It is a precision strike, a calculated move to draw attention to a man who holds the keys to a financial ledger buried beneath a concrete slab. The girl is not a victim returning home. She is a witness being deployed to burn the house down from the inside. Thorne knew this. He must have known. As I stare at the lab report, the reflection in the window shows the empty, rain-slicked street, and I realize the charcoal gray sedan wasn't leaving the scene. It was waiting for a signal. The neighborhood was not just a collection of properties. It was a carefully curated silence. Every resident on this street possessed a reason to keep the Thibault family history buried. I spent hours mapping the connections, looking past the pristine lawns and the quiet late-night porch lights. Mrs. Gable, the neighborhood matriarch, had been the primary beneficiary of the financial restructuring that followed the 2010 disappearance. But she was not acting alone. The ledger found beneath the basement concrete was not merely a record of her embezzlement. It was a map of complicity that involved half the homeowners on the block. They were all tied together by a web of short-term loans and property liens that would have been declared void the moment the Thibauts raised an alarm. Arthur Vance was the designated fall guy, the teacher whose past debts made him the perfect vessel for the blame. Yet, the evidence trail we are uncovering suggests a deeper, more chilling cooperation. Thorne knew about the ledger. He had to have seen it during his initial sweep 11 years ago, but he chose to look away, securing his own investments in the process. The girl's return is the pivot point. She is not just a witness. She is a wrecking ball designed to force these people to turn on one another. The charcoal gray sedan I saw parked 3 streets over is registered to a holding company linked to the Gable estate. It wasn't a getaway car. It was a surveillance post. As I look at the map of the neighborhood, I realize the trail doesn't end at Vance's front door. It leads directly into the basement of the house where the girl is currently being held. The question remains: Who is holding the leash? The girl speaks with a chilling precision, describing the layout of the basement where she claims to have been held for 11 years. She details the placement of a heavy support beam and the specific creak of the third step on the wooden staircase. But the forensic reality is an ironclad wall. I stood in that basement tonight, my flashlight cutting through the stale, damp air, and the structural evidence screamed in protest. The beam she described was only installed in 2018, 7 years after her disappearance. The staircase, stripped of its rotting carpet, shows no sign of the wear she insists was present during her long, dark confinement. It is not just a discrepancy, it is a physical impossibility. If she was never there, then where was she? And more importantly, who coached her to describe a room that didn't exist in that configuration until long after she was supposedly gone? Thorne stood at the top of the stairs, his shadow stretching long and thin across the concrete floor. He didn't offer a theory. He simply watched the dust motes dance in the beam of my light, his silence heavier than any denial. We are chasing a ghost who knows too much about the future and nothing about the past. The ledger found beneath the slab is the only thing that doesn't lie, but it is missing 3 pages. The exact pages that would have detailed the Gable estate transactions from the autumn of 2010. Someone was here before me, someone who knew exactly what to remove to keep the timeline from collapsing. The girl is a pivot point, but the lever is being pulled from somewhere else entirely. The silence in the basement is broken only by the hum of my portable light. Thorne is still watching, his posture rigid as if he is waiting for the walls to confess. I turn my attention to the neighbor's security feed. The one he insisted was broken. I have spent the last hour scrubbing through grainy low-light footage from that autumn night in 2010. The frame flickers showing the street, the driveway, and the charcoal gray sedan parked in the shadow of the hedge. My breath hitches. The driver emerges, a tall, lean silhouette, not Arthur Vance. It is a man with a distinct erratic gait, someone who moves with the practiced caution of a veteran. I zoom in on the plate, but the glare from a passing street lamp renders the numbers a jagged blur. Yet, the car itself is unmistakable. It belongs to the Gable estate. The realization hits me like a physical blow. The kidnapping was a secondary operation, a chaotic cover-up for a much larger systemic failure. Arthur Vance was never the architect. He was a convenient, debt-ridden distraction, a man paid to stay silent while the real players moved behind the curtain. Thorne shifts behind me, his boots scraping against the concrete, and the sound is like a gunshot in the quiet. He knows what I have found. He knows the timeline is shattered. If the girl was a pawn in a game designed to bury a financial crime, then she is not a survivor of a basement prison. She is the living proof of a murder that happened long before she ever arrived on this street. The game has changed, and we are no longer playing by the rules of a cold case. The Charcoal Sedan wasn't just a getaway car. It was a mobile vault. I look at the screen, the pixels dancing in the dim light, and realize the motive was never about the girl. It was about the ledger. Mrs. Gable's embezzlement scheme was hemorrhaging money by 2010, and the Thiebaus had stumbled upon the ledger, a paper trail that led straight to her front door. The kidnapping was an elegant, brutal distraction, a way to ensure the house was emptied, the evidence destroyed, and the neighbors too terrified to look at anything but their own locks. Thorne's silence makes sense now. He didn't ignore the evidence because he was incompetent. He ignored it because his own property investments were tied to the Gable Estates development project. If the truth about the embezzlement had surfaced then, the property value would have plummeted, taking his retirement with it. The girl, Shelby, wasn't a survivor returning home. She was a calculated instrument returned to the scene to finalize the framing of Arthur Vance. By placing her here, they were closing the loop on a decade-old debt. But they made a mistake. They assumed the basement floor was a tomb. It wasn't. It was a time capsule. Beneath the concrete, hidden behind the shifting dust, lies the original ledger, the one piece of evidence that links the Gable accounts to the very night the sedan parked in the driveway. The realization creates a new, sharper pressure in my chest. If the motive is this deep, if the rot extends through the entire neighborhood, then the girl isn't the only one in danger. We are sitting in the epicenter of a collapse, and the walls are beginning to buckle under the weight of the truth. Arthur Vance is in custody. The cuffs click shut under the harsh, flickering sodium glare of the precinct parking lot, and for a moment the narrative felt complete. The ledger, that heavy water-damaged weight we pulled from the basement floor, appeared to be the final piece of the puzzle. It documented the embezzlement, the missing funds, and the desperate, frantic attempts by the Gable estate to mask their insolvency. It was a clean, linear conclusion. Vance had been the inside man, the one tasked with scrubbing the records and orchestrating the kidnapping to ensure the house remained a ghost town while the financial rot was buried. We had the motive, the method, and the prime suspect. But then, the forensic timeline collided with reality. The lab report on the soil samples taken from Shelby's clothing arrived an hour ago. It contains traces of red clay and limestone dust, a specific mineral-heavy sediment found only in the northern quarries, 3 miles from the Gable estate. Vance's vehicle, that charcoal sedan we tracked, never left the residential grid of the suburbs. The tire tread patterns recorded by the neighborhood security cameras show no evidence of off-road travel, and the mileage on the odometer is consistent with short, local trips. If Vance was the one who held her, he didn't hold her at the quarry. And if the girl was at the quarry during those missing 11 years, then Arthur Vance wasn't her keeper. We are looking at a shadow play designed to keep our eyes on the actor, while the director walks away through the side exit. The red clay on Shelby's clothes didn't come from a quarry. It came from the foundation of the Gable estate itself. We returned to the house, ignoring the official records that claimed the basement was poured in a single monolithic slab. It was a lie. I took a sledgehammer to the corner near the furnace, the one spot where the moisture seepage had always been dismissed as a plumbing failure. After 3 hours of backbreaking work, the concrete gave way to reveal a hollow cavity, not a structural flaw but a deliberate engineered void. Inside, resting on a bed of damp, undisturbed red clay, was a small silver-plated watch. It wasn't just any watch. It was a custom piece, inscribed with the initials of the original lead investigator, Elias Thorne. My pulse thrummed in my ears, a rhythmic, sickening beat. This wasn't a kidnapping orchestrated by a desperate teacher to cover up a financial crime. This was a cover-up for a death that happened right here, in this basement, during the initial investigation 11 years ago. Thorne didn't just ignore the evidence. He created it. He had been there on the night Shelby disappeared, and he had been there when the original girl was killed, not by the Gables but by his own hand in a moment of panic. The girl we found today, the one claiming to be Shelby, wasn't a victim of the kidnapping. She was a witness. She was the leverage Thorne held over the Gables to keep them silent about his own brutality. The entire narrative of the last decade was a fragile architecture of lies, and now the foundation has finally collapsed. The watch was the anchor point. I laid it on the workbench, the metal cold against my skin. Thorne's initials weren't just a sign of ownership. They were a timeline. If he had dropped this in the basement 11 years ago, he was already inside the Gable house before the official search even began. The math was brutal. My mind raced, stitching the fragments together. The girl, who we call Shelby, wasn't a child of coincidence. She was an insurance policy. She had been groomed to mimic the missing girl's mannerisms, to wait for the exact moment when the statute of limitations on the financial fraud would blur the edges of the original crime. Thorne needed a victim to return to distract from the missing ledger, and the Gables needed a body to close the case. But the girl was the witness to an accident he couldn't hide. A fall, a struggle, a silence that became permanent. Thorne didn't just investigate the disappearance. He curated the void. He managed the Gables' terror, keeping them in a state of perpetual debt to his silence. I looked at the red clay on the concrete floor, then back at the watch. The pattern was clear. Every time the Gables tried to speak, the girl was moved. Every time Thorne felt the pressure of his own internal affairs unit, the girl was presented as a breakthrough. It wasn't a rescue. It was a cycle of controlled detention. The girl was never free. She was just being passed between predators who were terrified of the same basement floor. Now the watch sits here, and the silence in this room feels like it's finally beginning to scream. The girl was never the victim. She was the audience. As I looked at the red clay embedded in the heel of the small shoe I found near the furnace, the timeline finally buckled. She didn't return because she escaped. She returned because she was the only witness to what happened before the abduction even began. Thorne's watch, the one lying on my workbench, wasn't lost in a scuffle. It was dropped during the initial cleanup of an accidental death that preceded the kidnapping. The Gables didn't lose a daughter. They lost their leverage. Thorne, the man tasked with the original search, didn't just fail to find her, he facilitated the replacement. He needed a girl who looked enough like the missing child to satisfy the town's grief, while he buried the financial trail that led directly to his own property investments. The girl was trained to play a role, a living prop in a drama written by a man who treated law enforcement like a real estate portfolio. Every time the Gable house was searched, she was hidden in the crawlspace Thorne himself had vetted as empty. She wasn't kidnapped 11 years ago. She was installed as a failsafe. And now, as the floorboards creak under the weight of this realization, I see the final piece of the puzzle. The car reflection in the window wasn't a getaway vehicle. It was a delivery truck. And if the girl was the witness, then the person who actually pulled the trigger that night in 2010 is still walking free, protected by a detective who built his career on the foundation of a lie. The floorboards in the crawlspace didn't groan. They sighed, as if relieved to finally release the ledger I dragged from beneath the concrete. This wasn't just a financial document. It was a roadmap of embezzlement, signed by Mrs. Gable and countersigned by Thorne in a series of property acquisitions that spanned the very neighborhood where the girl who was never Shelby, was supposedly lost. The truth is colder than the pre-dawn air bleeding through the cracks in the foundation. In 2010, the Gables didn't lose a child. They lost their leverage when the real Shelby Thibault witnessed an accidental death during a heated argument over these very accounts. Thorne, already deep in the debt of the Gable fortune, didn't investigate a kidnapping, he orchestrated a cover-up. He needed a replacement to pacify the town while he buried the evidence. The girl was a pawn, groomed for over a decade to play the grieving returnee at the precise moment Thorne needed to solidify his alibi against a new, unrelated audit. I hear the crunch of gravel outside, the rhythmic, heavy tread of boots that have walked this path too many times. Thorne isn't here to rescue the girl. He is here to ensure the ledger never leaves this basement. The reflection of his cruiser's light catches the metal of my flashlight, a silent, blinding signal that the stalemate is over. He is standing at the top of the stairs, his shadow stretching long and jagged across the floor, a silhouette of a man who traded justice for a real estate portfolio. I have the ledger in my hand, the ink still legible, the names of the conspirators etched in the firm, damning script of a decade-old betrayal. The final act of this tragedy isn't a murder. It is the sound of a truth that can no longer be buried. The basement is quiet now, the air thick with the settling dust of a decade-long lie. Thorne is gone, taken by the weight of his own signature on those ledger pages, and the girl, the one who carried the burden of a ghost's name, is finally free to be herself, whoever that may be. The Gable Empire didn't crumble under the force of a weapon. It collapsed under the simple, crushing gravity of accounting. We spent weeks chasing the shadow of a kidnapped child, only to find a corporate shell game played with human lives. The true crime wasn't just the embezzlement or the accidental death in the dark. It was the audacity to believe that time would erode the truth. Mrs. Gable sits in a holding cell, her silence as cold as the concrete slab that guarded her secrets for 11 years. The neighborhood will move on, the police tape will be peeled away, and the houses will remain, but the foundations have been permanently altered. We look for monsters in the dark, but often, the most dangerous people are those who walk among us in the light of professional respectability. As we close this chapter, remember that every story has a hidden ledger, and every silence has a price. Thank you for walking this path of shadows with me. If you want to keep unraveling the tangled threads of truth, make sure to subscribe to Swasti Diaries.